Welcome to the Bill Walton Show, featuring conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers. Fresh perspectives on money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Interesting people, interesting things.
Okay, well, let's talk about Israel. Israel's built the world's preeminent high-tech economy on roughly 4% of the geographic land area of the Middle East. It's a liberal democracy with free elections, robust, free, and critical press. If you're Netanyahu, you know how critical it is. It's got an independent judiciary, which we should envy, human rights groups, women's rights, and gay rights. It also, and I didn't know this, Israel has 2 million Arab citizens who have the same civil rights as do the Jews. And yet, Israel's Arabs are the freest Arabs in the Middle East.
Yeah, and they aren't rebelling now either. In the middle of this war, everybody predicted after October 7th that there'd be uprisings of the Palestinians within Israel. And there hasn't been a peep.
And a man who needs no introduction, George Gilder, is here to tell us about it. George, welcome. You jumped right into my splendid intro, and you were better than I was. So anyway, here's George Gilder, great thinker, one of our best economic and technology thinkers in America, maybe the world. He's written Wealth and Poverty, Knowledge and Power. Most recently, he's rewritten extensively a book he published 25 years ago called Israel Test. And that's what we're going to talk about, because this book is filled with more wisdom and information than, I mean, thank you for writing this, George.
No, thank you.
So what happened? We had this war. Everybody thought the Arabs were going to rise up, and nothing.
And they didn't. In Israel, the Arabs appreciate their freedoms and prosperity and longevity in Israel, and they have not supported Hamas or Hezbollah during the course of this horrible war that is still underway there, and that's the upside. Another upside during the course of this war. Venture capital investments in Israel are up some 38%, which is
in the last year.
In the last year,
unbelievable.
Which leading the world.
Yeah.
We actually, because of our artificial intelligence boom, are enjoying some 25% increase in venture capital investments. And Israel is 38% or something this year.
Well, you should know. You spent a long time in the venture capital industry. And
yeah.
And so,
but the point I make is that the U.S. AI industry is dependent on Israel.
Explain that.
Well, 4 or 5 years ago, an American company called NVIDIA that you've probably...
I've heard of them.
Which is now...
I was a happy owner.
And some days is worth $3 trillion market cap and is the most valuable company in the world. And it does fuel, NVIDIA's chips fuel the AI efforts of Microsoft and Amazon and Google and Meta and all the others, and which give the American companies in the world, 70% of world market cap is commanded by American companies partly because of this AI boom. And it all really originated when NVIDIA, which was a video game company, it had these graphics processors that could manipulate 3D pixels for video games, bought an Israeli company called Mellanox and Migdal Haimek in Israel. And Mellanox, as Jensen Wang of NVIDIA confessed at the time, had a bigger footprint in the data centers of the world than did NVIDIA. And Mellanox makes communications technology. And it was the Mellanox NVLinks and...
Now, Mellanox was an Israeli company?
An Israeli company in Migdal HaEmek.
Right, but now it's part of NVIDIA.
And they've got bought by NVIDIA after collaborating with NVIDIA and turning these data centers, which full of racks and racks of computers, into an integrated single hyperscale computer that could deal with trillions and trillions of tokens or parameters for these amazing artificial intelligence breakthroughs that we all admire today. But that was all enabled by the Mellanox switch fabrics, which are the first communication systems that expand as the amount of data increases automatically. So you don't, an ordinary communications channel, you put more data into it and it slows down, or there's less bandwidth per message.
So they solved that problem.
But what Mellanox did was figure out how to integrate the communication systems of a whole data center and turn them into one hyperscale computer. And that's the foundation for all this ChatGPT and all the AI advances of recent years.
Well, the thing about Israel, Israel, after it was formed in 1948, 1949, 48, was a socialist country largely, and it was not doing well. And of all people, when Bibi Netanyahu was elected prime minister and brought in a lot of the free market ideas he did, that began to change. But the thing that really changed was with the collapse of the Soviet Union in '89, something like a million Russian Jews came into Israel who were hyper free market, pro-democracy, conservative. They were also brilliant scientists, many of them, and so Russia had a brain drain, and they all went to Israel, or most of them went to Israel.
Half of all the high-tech workers in Israel are Russians, from the Russian Jews.
So that's really the catalyst for this whole launching of the technology.
Israel almost died in 1985. You know, the whole economy collapsed. The Histadrut Bank paralyzed. The currency devalued massively. It was almost 1,000% inflation. They had to form a joint emergency government, and Bibi Netanyahu eventually came in as finance minister, and they dismantled, with the help of actually cooperation of John Snow and the Bush administration. They worked out a whole new regime for Israel, which saved the nation in the 1990s, and it became the fastest growing economy in the world, and it's now in per capita GDP eclipses Britain and South Korea and Japan and Germany and all these previous stars.
And your book makes the point that they're hated not only because they're Jewish, because everybody, the Jews have been hated through history, but because they're a lot richer now and a lot more impactful because of their technology, and they're punching way above their weight, and nobody around them likes that. I mean, he's made the surrounding populations look like they're from the Middle Ages, and guess what? That's pretty much what they're living in with with their belief system.
And this is the Israel test. The heart of the Israel test is how you react to people who excel you in intellect, creativity, wealth, accomplishment. Do you admire them and emulate them and learn from them, or do you envy and hate them and try to tear them down. And this is really the test of capitalism, or test of free enterprise, is whether you regard your competitors as expanding opportunities for you and exploring the frontiers of creation for you in the image of your creator, or whether you regard them as somehow a menace to your future.
Well, socialism, Marxism, communism, whatever you call it, is zero sum.
That's right.
Everything's material. They don't believe in expanding the pie.
Yeah.
They don't even factor in human ingenuity. Everything is just land. Just what is it? Land and capital or something. And the people doesn't come into it. And I think you make the point. I totally agree with. Is the people are the most invaluable resource we have.
Yeah.
At least smart people.
It's certainly clear, and we are all dependent on a small minority of geniuses, really, who open the horizons of the future for the rest of the world. And in recent history, a disproportionate number of them have been Jewish. I mean, today, half of the companies among the top 10 market cap companies in the world are founded or led by Jews, and many of them are dependent on Israel, and all the AI ones are ultimately have relied on Israeli inventions for their
you tell a story about von Mises. This is not just your book is not just about Israel, although it is. It's about what's happened with Jews over time and across centuries and across cultures. You talk about Charles Murray's book, Human Accomplishment?
Yeah, right.
That's interesting. What are some of the takeaways from that?
I mean, Charles Murray just documents that Jewish IQs are decidedly higher than the IQs of any other group.
Well, the thing,
but the tails of the high IQ distribution are massively Jewish. So that among the geniuses of the world, about half of them have been Jewish. It's just a fact of.
And they've won disproportionately more Nobel Prizes. They've invented more, and Charles documents in his book. And, but it's, the bell curve, and just to sort of flesh it out for everybody, the bell curve is that big lumpy thing. Tails down on either end.
That's right.
And the dumb people are at one end, and the brilliant people are at the other. The Jews average about 110 IQ.
Yeah.
And maybe ask you how do you pronounce the word? Ashkenazi Jews.
Ashkenazi
Jews are maybe way above that, 115.
Yeah.
And damn it, they all run hedge funds now in New York.
Which
a bunch of them attacked my company when I was running it, but that's a different show. But anyway, you're saying that the way out in that third and fourth standard deviation, they're disproportionately represented in like the 150, 180 IQ category.
Yeah.
So they excel in science, math, engineering, the arts, literature,
all kinds of
everything.
Yeah.
And people don't like that.
Yeah, people resent it. And I've just read a book by Solzhenitsyn, which hasn't been published officially in the United States, but it's been published in Europe, called 200 Years Together. And it tells the story of the Jews in Russia, how they arrived in Russia 200 years ago, roughly, more than 200 years ago, and went through their Pale of Settlement and their crises, and then their Marxist triumph that convulsed Russia, and then finally their exodus with the Jackson Amendment, when 1 million of them were released, and many of them went to Israel, and really enabled the great triumph of Israel. And Solzhenitsyn tells the story with passion and indignation about the Marxist phase, and it hasn't been published in the United States because it's regarded to be anti-Semitic, but it isn't. It just tells a great historic saga that we all saw. He tells about how, and Stalin was just about to initiate his final anti-Semitic pogrom, and he died on Purim.
He died what?
On Purim, the Jewish holiday that celebrates Esther saving the Persian Jews.
I didn't realize that even Hitler did it, and then you're saying even in the 50s, when Stalin was still alive, he was planning on doing the same thing in Russia?
He was. They had just, the pogroms in Russia were probably more far-reaching than in Germany, and they were inconvenienced by having Jews all through the high. 100 of the Russian generals were Jews in the Second World War. I mean, so Stalin's turn against the Jews was a failure of his Israel test that ultimately precipitated the flight of Jews from Russia, the fall of the Soviet Union, and the rise of Israel now as the leader of the West. And that story, Solzhenitsyn tells in a book called 200 Years Together, which is an amazing book.
I thought the Jews were in Russia longer than 200 years.
Not really.
They fled from somewhere else where they were being persecuted into Russia, and then they left. Okay.
Their exodus came with the Jackson Amendment. U.S. forced or kind of pressed Russia in exchange for various economic benefits to release Jews from Russia. And Solzhenitsyn's a little disgruntled because everybody in Russia was really imprisoned, and he's envious that only the Jews got to get away to America.
They were smart enough to figure it out.
Yeah.
But the one of the very interesting points you make is linking this hatred of the Jews, this envy of people who are more successful, groups of people who are more successful, and individuals, and this obsession with equality or equity is so wrong-headed.
Yeah.
Because society advances when you promote inequality in a way, which is when you allow people of high talent to do whatever people of high talent can do. And all of society benefits from the top 1/10 of 1% to do all the creative, build the companies. The Jews are disproportionately entrepreneurial. So we all win, and yet to try to level everybody down is incredibly destructive. And I think I spent a lot of time working in I had some education businesses. I'm out of that business. Don't recommend it. But what's happening in K-12, particularly in grade schools, they're trying to teach to the bottom 10%, the bottom 20%. They're focused on the lowest performing, and they're letting the highest performing kids just, fend for themselves. We ought to be putting an equal amount of resources into high talent kids.
We sure should. I mean, it just people are not the same. People are different. I mean, we don't see a lot of Jews in the NBA. And, it's just and really by collaborating with geniuses wherever they emerge from around the world, America became the leading country, and
so
when we stop collaborating with genius and begin envying, when we regard success as a theft rather than a gift, our economy collapses.
But the current formulation is it's because of discrimination.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what's being said.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah, amplify that. I mean,
It's just, the whole idea that it's, when you look at the most successful people in the United States, they're Asian now. Was there a lot of discrimination against the Chinese who were brought to the United States as helots or as coolies and work? I mean, it's just obviously true that we do not have discrimination in the United States. We have a reasonably open economy until recent years.
But they were violently discriminated against at the beginning, and they worked their way through it. I mean, they based their cultural values allowed them to say, "Look, you're going to prevent us from doing this stuff. We're going to go do something else," and they become wildly successful. So bring us back to Israel. Right now, it's September, October, 2024, and we've got Israel now. It's almost a year into the attack on October 7th, and we're now. Who's being drawn in? Lebanon being drawn in. The Hezbollah, Iran is there. Yeah. I mean, what is it?
It's Hezbollah which invaded Lebanon and really destroyed Lebanon. Most of the civilized Lebanese, many of them left. You know, Hezbollah had a just incredibly disruptive impact on Lebanon. They took it over, and in order to attack Israel, and their entire purpose is to exterminate Israel. They don't conceal it. Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, declared that he was glad Israel got created because it meant all the Jews would be concentrated in one place where he could kill them. And this is how. This is not a civilized movement. They do not want to negotiate. They want to kill.
And Mein Kampf
is a bestseller. They distribute Mein Kampf.
Yeah.
It was bestseller in the Middle East.
You don't have to buy it. They just hand it out like a Gideon Bible.
Is that right, Jeff? It's just this movement has to be defeated, and it's encouraging. It really is encouraging.
Well, the way we've got to defeat it, I believe, and you articulate this so well in your book, is this moral relativism that we're really talking about similar societies, and it's just over territory, is not true.
Yeah, that's right. It's not true.
I mean, on the one hand, I think I mentioned at the outset, we get a liberal democracy, technologically advanced. They support the rights of all sorts of minorities, including Arabs, and push them through. They've been a home to
Arabs are 16% of the employees in the high-tech businesses in Israel.
So you got a society that arguably says that's the society that's the right way to live, and then on the other hand, you've got the jihadist society, the Islamic society, and I don't want to get into the good versus the bad Islam, but certainly Hezbollah doesn't champion women's rights, doesn't champion gay rights, doesn't champion rights of anybody.
That's the least of it. They champion killing people. That's the crucial thing. But all this gay rights talk about, it's just, is sort of a distraction.
So you've been around, you've been a dominant figure in the intellectual scene for decades. How did the universities get taken over with this toxic anti-Semitism?
I think the spearhead of it was when they admitted lots of Muslim students because they paid full dollar and they took a lot of money for their endowments from Arab oil.
Saudi Arabia was funding,
and then the other students were intimidated and kind of shook up by these jihadists who actually have this passionate belief that their vision of the world is correct, and we have a kind of
so they did it by getting themselves into the universities and then infecting them. But is there anything in the world of critical race theory or DEI or any of those other isms that are toxically infecting our culture? Is there anything in that promotes the anti-Semitism?
I think that
I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to figure out why
it's all
this is
based on this illusion that all people are the same, and if they perform differently, it's a reflection of discrimination rather than excellence and achievement. That's the essential misconception. And they fail the Israel test. They envy success rather than emulate success. They see wealth as theft rather than wealth as a gift. And the genius of capitalism is the wealth of the rich is all invested. If it's not invested, it disappears. That's why
that's why sending all the money to the government is such a bad idea, because we've talked about this before. Capital needs to be in strong hands. And people, whether they're Jewish or just somebody very smart who is good at money, can take capital and compound it, and that compounding benefits all of society because they create wealth and there are more jobs. And these labels like trickle-down theory couldn't be more evil in a way, because it's just the opposite. What happens is you're creating great
surge up.
Yeah, the surge up, and so we're fighting this very. We're fighting a lot of very bad ideas, George.
They are. They're bad ideas that are prevailing widely in the United States today, and which are being spurned violently in Israel. I mean, Israel rejects this egalitarian vision, and it means that egalitarian objective rather than in the eyes of God, we're all equally blessed, but in performing high-tech engineering jobs, we're not all equally endowed. And if we and so Israel has become the leader of the West, I think, with Netanyahu and with its AI contributions and its healthcare and biotech innovations and its venture investment. I mean, it's really the leading country in the West, and Netanyahu is really the Churchill of our era, and when somebody emerges like Churchill.
George, you just got my show banned on YouTube.
What?
We just got banned on YouTube.
Oh gosh! Oh well.
I happen to totally agree with you, but he's the villain, and he's not a social. He's not. That's not an approved. That's not an approved thought you just uttered.
I know.
But okay, so let's criticize
But he's
Israel.
fighting Nazis in the same way. I mean, it's. And,
well, he's fighting Nazis
and the
because
Arabs in Israel are supporting him to amazing degree.
You've got a chapter that spells it out, how similar what they're doing, Hezbollah is doing, Hamas, is to what the Nazis were doing.
Yeah.
The only difference is the Nazis tried to hide it, and these people put it out on YouTube.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And YouTube will let them put that out, but not you telling him that Netanyahu's a great guy. So let's criticize Israel. What's wrong with Israel? What do we're fans. We recognize all the things it stands for. What do we?
They make mistakes like anybody else that takes risks. they make mistakes. They weren't very good on COVID. They adopted all.
They did the lockdowns as egregiously as anyone.
They didn't lock down so much. They were better than we were.
Yeah.
But they very aggressively vaccinated and suffered from it. I mean, it's.
But what
I don't want to go.
mistakes are-
That's another issue that'll get you banned, and I don't want to.
We may have 3 or 4 strikes already
You know,
here.
they do have. It's a intense debate. I think their judiciary is conducting lawfare against Netanyahu in a very malicious and destructive way.
They're doing the same thing to him that they're doing to Trump.
There's the same forces that indicted and criminalized Trump also are trying to indict and criminalize Netanyahu. There's the same. It's an evil movement that's global, and when law no longer is founded on morality and truth, that it becomes an instrument of power, and can destroy a country. This was the fundamental insight of the founders of the United States, that it was our legal constitutional order was ultimately founded on a Judeo-Christian moral order. And if the Judeo-Christian moral order is eroded, the legal order becomes perverted.
Well, and that's what's happened.
And
yeah.
that's what's happened. I mean,
Well,
it's amazing that we don't have any real way to stop a prosecutor who's obviously just pursuing a political goal, perverting the courts for political purposes.
Well, in New York
that's
State,
happening in that happened in Israel as well as in the United States.
Well, in New York, they got the legislature to pass a law which appeared to appeal to directed only one man, Donald Trump. And then they found a judge and a prosecutor and a judge and an attorney general. It's ugly, but that's so. Where do fast forward a year from now? Where do you see? I mean, it seems to me like we're heading into something involving lots of missiles and lots of things getting blown up in the Middle East.
Well,
we're already there with that.
I think that we really have to stop the idea that we're going to fight a war with China over Taiwan. Or Kissinger and Nixon, way back in the 1970s, understood that Taiwan was part of China, and that for the West to intervene in Asia and try to defend Taiwan and render Taiwan as an instrument of Western power rather than part of China was provocative and would not succeed. So Nixon and Kissinger established the principle with the Chinese that we would recognize Taiwan as part of China. Now we are attempting to stop Taiwan from selling chips to China. I mean, we're trying to prevent Taiwan from even trading with China in high technology products. And I think this is way overreach. And I think we're just, China is 20 times more powerful than it was when Kissinger and Nixon made that agreement. And what we're doing is we're driving China into the arms of Russia and Iran. And this is artificial and kind of alliance that our current foreign policy is impelling, and which Trump understood. Trump dealt with these countries transactionally. You know, he understood that you know, the give and take of.
But let me press you on that.
But for us to have a war with China at this point would destroy the United States. That would be the result of it.
Let me engage in hubris, not hubris, but overreach, my own, not yours. I got into a debate with Art Laffer.
Yeah.
About free trade with China.
Oh yeah.
And I thought that we ought to be very careful about free trade with China because of their larger purpose, their largest design. President Xi shows no interest in a liberal free market order. He's very much a totalitarian statist, and so I thought we had to treat China differently because of those facts. And of course, Dr. Laffer did not agree with me, and I don't think you do either. So I find myself on the other side of the argument with George Gilder and Art Laffer. So what the hell am I doing
just
here?
Look at the U.S. Companies are 70% of global market cap, and we attained that position by intimate exchange with China, with constant trade and technology exchange and importing Chinese students, and that whole era where the U.S. and China really were deeply embroiled resulted in this huge expansion of the U.S. economy. Our companies were gaining 40% margins, while Foxconn and Shenzhen was making 3% margins. They made all our iPhones.
But two concerns. One is the hollowing out of the jobs in America. That did happen. It also happened when they moved to Mexico. The argument that I now begin to appreciate more is that when we talked about trade policy, we also ought to be thinking about labor policy and what happens to jobs. So yeah, I mean, I was guilty. I was in the private equity business, for God's sakes. You know, if you got a job, get it to China. Where they can do it cheaper, better, faster. Well, that you paid a big price for that, because you look at these Midwest, the J.D. Vance world. It's been hollowed out. So how do you answer that question? Because Hillary would say, well, we're all going to teach them to be computer programmers, and that didn't happen.
The country got richer, its longevity increased.
Okay.
We just, I just think that that's a wrong theory. It ignores our absolutely catastrophic energy policy. We've got a $3 trillion program to dismantle our grid and replace it with feckless, inefficient, vulnerable, druidical sun henges and windmill totem poles and this utterly spurious climate religion.
I think
if we want to dismantle our economy, just have the entire federal apparatus devoted to destructive policies, of course we're going to get poorer. We can't blame China for this. This is us. We did this.
China's building a coal plant every 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's right. China is
2 coal plants a week.
Yeah, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with coal plants. That's
CO2 is a good thing.
What? CO2 is a good thing.
Yes.
It means the
Okay, I now can count 6 or 7 strikes on this show.
What?
YouTube strikes.
Oh, all right.
CO2 is good. Our climate policy is madness.
Well,
it is.
Well, it is. And Bill, you know, the leading scientists in the world, we talk about climate scientists, but Will Happer was explaining how...
Will was here in that chair not too long ago.
Oh, he was?
Yeah.
He was great.
Yeah.
So you know, I don't have to tell you what Will Happer thinks, but...
we tell us. So I heard it. Say it again. Say it again.
Freeman Dyson also agrees. The new Nobel laureate, Clauser, who my daughter wrote a book about, who did entanglement theory, quantum entanglement theory, that now is the basis of quantum computing, which I think. But anyway, the great scientists understand that there's a bigger threat of too little CO2 than too much CO2.
It's been falling for the last couple 100 million years, and it almost reached Death Valley before, a couple decades ago.
And in the Israel test, we tell a story about Loudermilk, who was an agronomist for the Roosevelt administration in the 1930s, and his job was to find remedies for the Dust Bowl. And this was a real climate crisis in the 1930s in the United States, far worse than anything that's happened in recent years. And Loudermilk went all around the world investigating different countries and agricultural systems. And the solution to the climate crisis he found in Israel, where they had turned the desert into this blooming
the Dust Bowl was in the 30s. This was pre-Israel. This was Palestine. Okay, so they figured it out in the Middle East. Before they had
Jewish immigrants
had figured it out.
Had figured out how to.
Okay.
They eliminated the malarial swamps around. You know, when the Jews came and the big influx of Jews came to Palestine in the mid-19th century, 1850s and on, there were only between 200 and 300,000 Arabs in the Palestine area. And their average longevity was about 35 years. And Petah Tikva and near Tel Aviv was a malarial swamp, and it was believed it was impossible to treat it. I mean, the land was a wasteland, and they've transformed it by planting 1 million trees, by 548 wells. And finally developed world-leading desalinization plants and waterworks of all kinds. And to the extent that during the subsequent 100 years or whatever, while industrial production increased 60-fold or more, and agricultural production increased 16-fold, and they expanded the land under use 3-fold. Their total use of water, net use of water, dropped 10%. In other words, one of the things that Israel has done is absolutely demonstrate that the so-called water crisis that environmentalists in California prattle about is spurious. All the policies needed to address any kind of water crisis have been enacted Israel, and they're demonstrated. Israel now exports almost $3 billion of agricultural goods every year. Exports. Israeli farming is a miracle of, and Loudermilk saw the beginnings of that and wrote a book about Israel.
What happened to the Dust Bowl? Did it just nature took it away? It became a non-issue. Just finally, as nature does, it changed its mind and moved on. Right. Did something else. Yeah. Let's talk. I want to talk more about climate because to me that's one of the biggest crimes of extant. And I've got three categories of motivations. One, it's a secular religion, this whole thing.
That's right.
Two, it's greed. The $3 trillion, that's going to get spent on somebody. Yeah. And they're all Democrat. And three, it's power. And if you make, climate really seems to be about centralization of power. Yeah. And, it's the old Klaus Schwab world or whoever.
Emergency socialism is what I call it in this book.
What, life after capitalism?
Life after capitalism. You declare
go ahead.
You declare a crisis, and then you establish, administrative bodies to impose new rules to address a crisis.
Was that Woodrow Wilson that said we need a moral equivalent of war? Something. It was a
moral equivalent of war.
So war allows government to take control of all the resources, and so you need to find another crisis. Did you ever read Michael Crichton's book on climate?
I did. I mean, Michael Crichton had it all long before the rest of it. Well, I actually already was receptive, but Michael Crichton, who is
did you know him?
I didn't know him, but I read his works. Yeah. Did you know him?
No, I wish I had.
He was a genius science fiction writer. I loved his science fiction works, and he did climate change eloquently and a gripping.
Okay, we're going to plug somebody else's book. He's dead. I don't know who's getting the royalties, Michael Crichton, but he makes a point.
Which is the book on climate change?
State of Fear.
State of Fear.
State of Fear. Yeah. And he makes a point that all these climate headlines started coming up in the 90s, and there wasn't anything about it before 1989. And what happened in 1989 was the Soviet Union fell. And we needed we lost an enemy. Yeah. We lost the nuclear threat. We lost this all of a sudden. So they had his theory, and I like it, is that they had to invent a new thing to be afraid of. Yeah. And that was climate. Yeah. And they built the whole edifice of fear. Yeah. And kids now, grade school kids, are terrified.
It's incredible. It's incredible to read every day in the paper. They're trying to blame lower test scores on climate and
they are,
and longevity, and it is a big lie. It's the big lie of our time, and it's the foundation for the new Marxism that's being imposed, and that is laying waste to our economy today,
and amplify
countervailed chiefly by the continuous fount of innovation that comes from Israel. That's really the picture.
See, one of the stories that you tell, and I think this is another Israel invention, or maybe not an invention, but they're developing it, is graphene. And we live in this terrible media world and political world where everything's zero sum, everything's scarce. We got to shut everything down. We got to reduce population, all that. And we live in a world of superabundance if you look at things differently.
Graphene.
Graphene. Well, that was the thing about, we've got all that, China. I know China's great. I don't think they're as great as you do, but they've dumped all these plastics into the rivers. They've got the most polluted rivers on the planet, and it's all going out into the Pacific Ocean, and it's floating around about the size of Texas now. What are we going to do about it?
Well, Jim Tour, the head of the Graphene and Materials Science Lab that leads the world in Rice University in Houston,
Right.
regards this as a huge resource, that this plastic island is a resource of carbon to be converted into single layers of graphene that currently sell
If you're listening to this, write that down, graphene, because that's the next big thing.
Yeah, it's a two-dimensional carbon sheet that is 200 times stronger than steel, 1,000 times more conductive than copper. It switches in the terahertz, that's trillions of cycles a second, rather than the gigahertz, where silicon pretty much tops out in the gigahertz. And so it's 1,000 times better electronic material. And yet it's as flexible as rubber.
So this would,
it's invisible.
This would move silicon into
Yes.
different.
A great scientist at Georgia Tech named Walt DeHeer has just developed, who Jim Tour at Rice thinks deserves the Nobel Prize. DeHeer developed a wafer scale graphene on silicon carbide, so you use a wafer of silicon carbide, you sublime out the silicon in the top layer, and you get a perfect graphene layer. So you have wafer scale electronics on graphene on silicon carbide. Silicon carbide is all the power supplies and all. It's
So how does
chip.
this transform the economy?
Because it means that data centers, which are currently really a kludge. This is my new paradigm.
Kludge?
A kludge is too complex, really.
Okay, kludge. Good word.
It loses efficiency as it grows bigger.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't have economies of scale. It's a kludge. They've abandoned planar chips for 3D chips and chiplets and interposers and layers. This is the climax of the silicon era in the data centers of the world, which do perform with NVIDIA devices, perform the the artificial intelligence.
So this will dramatically reduce the demand for electricity because this crisis that's coming.
It's thousands of times more efficient than the silicon technology that dominates
So what
our
are the
data
barriers
center.
to making this happen? What are the barriers to expanding this? Because just to take it back to where we started, my understanding is that Silicon Valley, which is focused on AI and software, is not interested because this is a different type of technology. And so Israel is taking this up, and Israel is developing this.
Jim Tour couldn't get venture capitalists in the United States to support his companies.
Yeah.
And he's got 18 of the companies that spun out of Jim Tour's lab are in Israel. Unfortunately, the chief activity spinning out of Walt DeHeer's lab at Georgia Tech is in China. And the China Initiative is now investigating Georgia Tech for selling out to China.
Yeah.
And the result is they forced DeHeer's students to go back to China, where they're lavished with venture capital. And but I think But I have a different view. I do not believe China is ultimately our enemy. And I don't like Xi Jinping's politics, but I believe that advances in technology in China have helped the U.S. just as advances of technology in China in Israel fuel the U.S. economy.
You know, but the corollary to the great Zionist theory or the great entrepreneur theory is the great leader theory or the great evil leader theory. And I think with Xi, seems to me that Xi has been the driving force of all the bad stuff that's happening in China. And he's the one that's picking up on the center of humiliation and going after, you know, he's the one that's hitting these themes hard of nationalism. And he's shutting down the market economy. He's locking up billionaires. He's shutting down private tutoring.
It's not locked down. The market economy is being inhibited in various ways, but it's they still have more venture activity and more startups and
venture activity has fallen dramatically in the last 3 years.
Yeah, it did.
But
they still got it. And they still...
Well, let me get to my point. I'm going to accept your idea that maybe China is not the biggest threat, but I think Xi is, or Xi in his current manifestation. It seems to me you get rid of Xi, you could have a very different leadership in China, and we could re-engage.
And that's happened. I mean, that's happened in the past.
In history.
In history. And for us to enable Xi, we've got our... We've recently tried to stop the Chinese chip industry, you know, to block them from high-tech chips from Taiwan, which makes most of the leading-edge chips in the world are made in Taiwan. And we're trying to stop the Chinese from having access to Taiwanese chips that use high-tech wafer fab equipment, some of which comes from the United States. And the result has been that the Chinese chip industry has boomed. Their wafer fab equipment sector has grown
40–50%,
while ours has lost 20% of its sales. The idea that some socialist policy that we impose in the United States can stop China from advancing in technology is just spurious. China didn't steal our technology. They adopted our technology and our industry standards and our design rules, and they created a system that allowed American technology to rule the world. And now we're dismantling our leadership through climate change obsessions and through CHIP Act, enshrinement of obsolete tools. We're driving China into the arms of Russia and Iran. And I believe it's one of the great foreign policy disasters in history that Henry Kissinger went to his death a few months ago, grumbling against this terrible mistake that we were making in China. And I was Henry Kissinger's student and in my youth, and I think he was a great thinker, and his success with China was awesome. Deng Xiaoping essentially adopted Western economic principles for China, and they still persist in China as much as they do here. I mean, here we're adopting a new Marxism with diversity and equity and administrative tentacles everywhere throughout the economy. And and we're banning our energy technology, and we're trying to mandate this and that, and I think it's futile, a big mistake, which I think we'll get beyond, and I think China will get beyond. But we should avoid a war in the process, and I think Trump understands that, by the way. That's one of the, Trump does not want a war with China. He's smart. The people who imagine that we can have some benefit from fighting a war with China are just demonic.
Well, those are the same people that think it's a good idea.
You're too close to D.C. here.
Well, I'm not that close. I'm not that infected with it. No, I think I'm much more. It really doesn't matter what I think. It matters what you think. And we got to wrap the clock on the wall. My producer's saying supposed to wrap this thing up. We should go Joe Rogan length, but we're not there yet. I not only recommend the Israel test, but I recommend Life After Capitalism. I recommend Knowledge and Power. I recommend Life After Google. I recommend, which one am I forgetting?
Wealth and Poverty.
Wealth and Poverty. The anchor.
The Spirit of Enterprise, which I wrote before Micron technology went public. That was a daring thing to write a whole book about a company that hadn't even gone public. And Micron technology is now leading the world in memory chips, or it's close to it competes with Samsung as the world's leading producer of memory chips.
Okay, now so we'll also go by Micron. Do you still own Micron?
Micron is a mature company now.
Okay,
but I wrote about it in 1985.
Okay, well, I hate to wrap this up. Anyway, George Gilder's been here today. You're coming back. You got another book in the works on graphene. A lot, and it's worth it every time. It gets better every time. Much fun. Okay, so thanks for joining, and we'll see George Gilder will be back. I've got a few people that have a different view about China, but I'm beginning to think that George is correct. It might be fun to have you guys talk so
sure,
we could debate this thing out. It'd be fun.
I'm not afraid to debate people.
Oh, I know. All right, well, thanks for joining Bill Walton Show. Whatever platform you're watching or listening to, subscribe and ask your friends to subscribe. It's a very unusual show. You won't find much like it elsewhere on the internet. And anyway, glad you took this in, and we'll be talking with you soon.